Welcome to the 79th episode of the Reading and Writing Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Rutherford. Stay tuned for my interview with Michael Olson, author of the new thriller novel, Strange Flesh. I wanted to ask again at the beginning, if you have listened to this podcast and found it enjoyable or found it valuable to your interest in writing or reading, if you could take 2 to 3 minutes and leave me a review on iTunes, it means other people can have a chance of finding the podcast within iTunes. The review process on iTunes is very simple. You just find the podcast and hit the review button and write a quick review. And of course, your efforts will be appreciated. Thanks a lot, and stay tuned for the interview. Welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is Michael Olson, author of the new thriller novel, Strange Flesh. Strange Flesh has been described as hacker noir, and it's a suspense novel with sex, technology, massive multiplayer online games, and virtual reality. Michael, welcome to the podcast.
Hi there, thanks.
Sure. Well, first, can I get you to read the first 3 or 4 paragraphs of Strange Flesh?
Sure, I'd be delighted to. The human mind is prone to infection. I don't mean the scorching fevers of meningitis or the insidious tunneling of parasites from unclean food. These days we tend to use the language of disease to discuss ideas, viral memes, contagious media, vectors and payloads. We've all seen things that take root and keep us up at night. Many of us harbor thoughts that gradually poison our souls. In my case, a single vision has plagued my dreams for the past year or more. I'm sure it will haunt me for life.
Great. Well, if I described Strange Flesh earlier very, very quickly, if listeners haven't heard about Strange Flesh yet, how do you describe the novel?
Sure. So I guess I generally call it sort of a pretty sanguinary mystery concerning what I sort of describe as the dawning of the heterosexual age, which is basically when our sort of erotic relationships start to become more and more deeply entwined with the internet. And so when we began with our narrator, James Price, he's an elite, what they call a social engineer with a shady network security company called Redrook. And so social engineer is someone who breaks into computer systems at corporations and enterprises using the techniques of like a traditional competence man rather than your sort of an engineer-based hacker. Mm-hmm. And as we open, James is going through a hard time. His engagement has recently broken off, and he's engaging in kind of some, I guess I'd say, risky nocturnal behavior to console himself. He's called into a meeting with the Randall twins, who he knows from having attended Harvard with them. And Blythe is the love of his life, Blake, his college nemesis. And they've just inherited IMP, which is one of America's largest media companies. And their problem is that they need his help with, is that their half-brother, Billy, who's this sort of game-obsessed transgressive artist, who is, sort of generally seeking to kind of undermine their family empire, has just sent them this kind of grotesque video of him electrocuting himself. And as James looks closer at the video, he sees that what he's really sort of symbolically doing is virtualizing himself into this decadent online world called Nod. And so the Randall twins want James to infiltrate this downtown artist colony called Game to try and figure out what Billy is up to. So at Game, James finds a number of strange things afoot, including the recent suicides of 2 members of Billy's artistic clique. And he also discovers that Billy started this lavish alternate reality game that's based on the writings of the Marquis de Sade. Finally, James insinuates himself with this glamorous group of technophiles who are working on a secret project that they think is going to really revolutionize the world. And that's kind of the moment at which things start getting really strange.
Right. Well, I know that you've worked as a software engineer yourself, and you have a master's degree from New York University's Interactive Technology Platform. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah. Interactive telecommunications program,
Right,
indeed.
right. And for people who are diehard players of massive multiplayer games now, such as World of Warcraft or Eve, or there's a new one based on Star Wars.
Right.
Those players understand the fun of playing these games, and some would even say that the games can be addictive. I know that many people used to jokingly refer to EverQuest as Evercrack.
Right.
However, I feel like in a lot of ways, with the exception of like there was a South Park episode that parodied World of Warcraft, but I think like on the greater consciousness of pop culture, that these games are still kind of under the radar screen. And I'm just curious. I mean, given the book that you have written and your own knowledge of technology, with technological advances going on now, like the Kinect controller for Xbox, or if you want to even take something even more recent, just in the last 24 or 48 hours, these virtual reality eyeglasses that Google is working on. Where do you think that these games are headed, and do you think that more people will end up playing them?
Yeah, I really do. I mean, so certainly MMOs have been a huge story in terms of game development recently, and have massive online player populations, not just here, but obviously across the world and in Asia. And so certainly among the younger generation, I would say that they're very much part of the cultural milieu.
Sure.
I guess one of the issues is that they're extremely, time consuming, and then also can be, complex and difficult to figure out. I think is the sort of perception.
Sure.
Um, but as we start seeing interface technology, sort of making its way into our homes that makes it easier, so that you can like interact with the virtual environment in more of a natural way with your bodies in terms of like physical gaming type things, or using voice commands and stuff like that, to where the whole experience is a little bit more intuitive. I think you can imagine seeing, I think a much wider, penetration of games like that into the sort of like broad-based gaming community, which at this point really is not just not just restricted to young people. You really see a pretty broad penetration into all age groups, in terms of casual gaming or online gaming or what have
Sure,
you.
sure. And I think it's interesting too. I mean, obviously in reference to your book Strange Flesh, that now for the most part, a lot of these games are built and produced by large media companies, and as a result, a lot of them I feel like are kind of aimed at almost like a 10-year-old audience. There's I mean, like World of Warcraft, not that I spend lots of time thinking about this, but there's almost a complete absence of sex in the game, and even the violence is kind of cartoonish. Do you think that eventually there's going to be MMOs that are designed from the ground up to be more adult oriented, and for to have more mature themes, not just about sex?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think right now it's certainly the case that these big flashy games, like the new Star Wars one or whatever, are just incredibly expensive to produce,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that produce and run and and all that kind of stuff. But when you have a really big hit, the amount of money they make is literally just incredible. So I think that tends to produce the same kind of sort of like, and I'll use this term loosely, but sort of Hollywood type.
right, right.
You want to hit a real general mainstream audience with them. Now, as it becomes like, so not only are games getting better and better, and more easy and intuitive to figure out and play, but also the tools used to make them are getting rapidly better. And so is that what I would imagine is, as we see people start to develop really good game making tools and kind
Hmm.
of like platforms where you don't have to write everything from scratch,
Right.
that you would see a more independent gaming community develop. Even you can imagine the creation of sort of like grassroots games or whatever,
Right.
that can really address a lot more niches in terms of content. And I mean, you do see a little bit of that in the kind of like role playing communities on sort of platforms like Second Life and places like that, where people just come together to make their own games within the platform. But I wouldn't say overall they have the sort of like punch or whatever as like a de novo, massive production game like World of Warcraft or something like that. But
Right.
I mean, it's like the community's out there, and it's just a question of what it develops into.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I think you're right. I mean, I think, if you look at the technology curve on in just about any area or any vertical, I mean, the tools should get cheaper and cheaper. I mean, you now have content creation tools that you can buy for $3 or $4 on the iPad and create movies and songs, etc. That it's just kind of mind blowing when you think about how an album was made even 20 years ago. So I think you're right. I think there will be like,
right.
I think that once those tools come down in price and complexity, you're going to have a much more organic and people doing kind of homegrown MMOs.
Yeah, it'll certainly be exciting to see how that develops. I mean,
Yeah.
I would say there are some countervailing type trends in terms of like games generating certain network effects and sucking all the oxygen out of the room for other games. Like that kind of stuff can happen.
Yeah.
And also there's just the technical escalation that happens, right? If you want to work on the cutting edge, with regard to video or whatever, we've seen that sort of prosumer tools can get you pretty far along the curve. But there are, of course, complexities with games, especially MMOs, that might lead one to believe that curve is still a little bit farther out in the
Oh
future.
yeah, certainly,
So,
certainly.
it's certainly an extremely exciting space to watch develop, and we're just kind of at the beginning of it right now.
Sure. Well, you've worked as a software engineer. What was the experience like for you writing Strange Flesh and writing a fiction novel? Did you find any parallels between your software coding, or is fiction writing completely separate from the skills and talents of computer programming?
I mean, there's certainly very different, I guess, processes that to me, felt pretty different, while I was doing them. I did take certain attitudes, I guess, from programming that I think really helped me at least get through the first draft of the book. And so that's things like, functional decomposition. So when you begin a novel, right, that's like a, pretty daunting task. And your progress can be extremely slow and seem insignificant at first. Large problems and break them down into the smallest possible ones, so that it becomes more a question of just figuring out one scene or one line of dialogue. And through that, when you commit to that process, you see the eventual kind of accretion of triumphing over like little challenges that eventually kind of add up into the big thing. So from a motivation question and sort of thinking about structures and stuff like that. I think that was helpful. But they are very different in the sense that when you're coding, you can just compile it and
Right.
it kind of shows you, and then test it and it works and you're like, great. Whereas you never really get that kind of payoff with writing, unfortunately.
Yeah,
So
you need to come up with a compiler for novels.
indeed.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so what was the impetus for you for writing Strange Flesh? Have you always written fiction, or what made you sit down and start working on a novel?
Right. No, this is definitely, kind of the first thing I'd ever really written. I mean, I think I was one of those people who sort of always had a closeted writer kind of locked up inside him that, would be, I guess, revealed by overly elaborate emails and stuff like that. So it was definitely something in my mind that I thought I wanted to try. And as evidenced by the fact that when I had sort of the slightest opportunity, I really jumped at it, and spent a lot of time actually writing the book. But it was definitely a pretty sharp left turn for me in terms of my career and all that, but a really rewarding one.
That's great. That's great. Well, as someone who has spent a lot of time working with technology and thinking about technology, what what are your thoughts about the rise of ebooks? And specifically, I was curious about the what some people are starting to refer to as kind of a social reading experience. And while I think it might be anathema to some people, I think that it would be very simple for most e-reading devices to have either a column or box within the user interface that shows other people who are reading that same book and comments that they may be making in real time. And I was just curious what your thinking is around that.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm very much a technophile. I think there are probably authors out there who are suspicious about the rise of ebooks. And I'm not like exclusively devoted to them. I mean, I often,
Sure.
When I have a favorite author come out, I'll definitely buy the hardback, if nothing else for its sort of decorative properties. But on the other hand, I read a lot, and just the ability to dial up the type is important enough for me to like to do a lot of reading on the ebook, just to prevent eye strain. So with regard to social reading type stuff, when I'm personally immersed in a novel, the last thing in the world I want is a bunch of annotations and and stuff on it.
No, I hear you. I'm the same way.
Right, right. I know that especially the younger generation who are used to kind of multimedia tasking and stuff like that. They're used to watching TV with chat boxes and whatever open. And so, I think in general, reading is a little bit more mentally demanding of focus than other sort of more ambient media experiences.
Right.
But I mean, where the idea of like social reading excites me is in terms of like creating communities who are interested in books that are there for you after you finish the book, in terms of discussing it and finding new things to read and just sort of exploring the world of books.
Sure.
But I mean, I'm sure all sorts of interesting develops are going to happen, and it'll be interesting to watch what takes off and what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, exactly. Are you working on another novel now?
I've got a pretty diverse cast of projects in incubation, mostly outlining right now. And now that Strange Flesh has been loosed upon the world, it's definitely time to, I think, pick one of them and start banging away at it.
Great. Well, given your experience with writing and getting Strange Flesh published, what tips or advice would you offer for aspiring writers who are pursuing the same thing of getting their novels published?
Right. So let's see. I mean, there's a lot of really good writing advice out there by far better writers than I am. And so my first thing would be like, read the books, which I think a lot of writers are sort of resistant to do for whatever reason. But read what Stephen King has to say about writing, and there's a bunch of other marvelous ones out there that are the sort of the compiled wisdom of other writers. And there's not one way to write, but at least knowing the way, the different ways and different strategies that the pros use, is a really helpful base from which to find out what works. And so, for example, like the way I write is, I make an extremely detailed outline, so I know exactly what I'm doing at any given point, which sort of like tamps down the fear of staring at a blank page. And I know
Right.
other people don't write that way or whatever, but you should figure out what it is that keeps you going. And I think the one thing that pretty much everyone will agree that you have to do is kind of like pick a consistent time every day that you're just sitting there writing, and don't break that, because whether what you write in that given period of time is wonderful or terrible, it's always going to be better than nothing, which is what happens to most novels, right? Is that they never get written. Just figuring out the way to just get the words out, I think, is obviously the most important. And then, just really learn to appreciate the idea that writing is rewriting, and that you can't set any kind of limit or anything like that on how much rewriting you have to do to get it right. And you just have to really be prepared to take things apart over and over again until they really sing. And then finally, I think one of the pieces of advice that I got that was really helpful, that isn't super intuitive, is that you kind of have to learn to be cruel to your characters, not in terms of like judging them or whatever, but in terms of the idea that, especially suspense writing, thrives on putting your characters into difficult positions. And I think especially beginning writers have a tendency to kind of fall in love with their characters and try and solve problems for them. You have to remember that your job as an author is to create problems for them, and then kind of try and let them solve them for themselves.
Gotcha. And who are some of the writers that you enjoy reading that kind of maybe inspired you along the way in terms of fiction?
Oh, I mean, that's certainly an incredibly long list.
Well, what's the top 3 or 4 that come to mind, I guess?
Sure. I mean, just in terms of what I was really trying to do with this book, the guys at the top of my mind were William Gibson and Neil Stephenson. Just in terms of they to me are 2 authors that I wouldn't necessarily say that their books are about technology per se, but they definitely channel the sort of technological zeitgeist
Sure.
in such an acute way that their books actually, if you go back and look at it, influence the actual development of the kind of technologies that they were envisioning. For example, the CEO of Second Life said that he got into the business because he read Snow Crash a long time ago, and so I definitely knew that I wanted to write about a technology, and so the sort of grand masters of that, I would say are those 2 guys, and then I could have a giant list of favorite authors, but I suppose that those are probably the most relevant.
Right. Well, where can people find you online?
Sure. I've got a website that's michaelolsonbooks.net. Or then, there's an author page up on Facebook.
Okay, and I'll have links to those in the show notes. Well, again, we've been speaking with Michael Olson, author of the new suspense novel, Strange Flesh. Michael, thanks for doing the interview.
Oh, thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Susan, it's so great to finally be able to get together again.
Oh, it sure is. And I really appreciate you picking up the bill.
I'm happy to. I've got the extra cash. Since we've all been driving so much more again, I've been using Get Upside, the free gas app that pays you cash back for every gallon of gas you buy.
Wait a minute. Are you saying you actually get paid cash when you buy gas with the Get Upside app?
Yes, up to 25 cents a gallon. Cash back every time I buy gas.
Does that actually add up to anything?
Some months I make $200 to $300.
Wow, that's serious extra cash. I'm downloading the free Get Upside app now.
Download the free Get Upside app now in the App Store or Google Play to save up to 25 cents a gallon when you buy gas. Use promo code PHIL for a 25 cents a gallon bonus on your first tank. That's up to 50 cents a gallon on your next fill-up. You can cash out anytime to PayPal or an e-gift card for Amazon and other brands. Just download the free Get Upside app and use promo code PHIL for a 25 cents a gallon bonus on your first tank. That's code PHIL.